So, kia ora tātou, everybody. Bruce Arroll's my name. I'm one of the professors in the Department of General Practice and Primary Healthcare. And you've already had one lecture, I think, haven't you? So, one or two so far, have you? Or was this the first?
We had like a workshop.
Oh, I had a workshop, okay. So these are quite important, these talks. I would suggest you come to all of them because there's learning points there. You'll learn a lot about. But this is quite important because I call this presentation literacy. Now, I was never taught this stuff when I was at your stage, and yet I think it's a core skill for you in this world. Being able to give a good talk raises your mana in front of your colleagues. If you think you can control a country with good oratory, for good or bad purposes, Adolf Hitler controlled Germany by good oratory. People look at the way he used to talk and try and mimic him. People like Barack Obama, equally the same, able to come in. So, yeah. So, interesting. If you ask people what the thing they fear most in life, fear of public speaking is up there. Does that ring a bell for you? So the thought, if I said pop up here now and give a speech, most of you probably wouldn't be too excited by that. So I'm not going to do it, by the way. I do play tricks on audiences, but not that. And then this guy who now owns TED Talk. So everyone's seen a TED Talk here? Okay. Anyone know what TED stands for? Technology, Education and Design. But, so this guy has bought it. And what's interesting about TED Talks is that they're always interesting, aren't they? Have you ever seen one you didn't like? Some people need 200 practices to be able to do that. But anybody can do a TED Talk. All you in this room could do a TED Talk. Some may require one practice, some of you may require 200, but just know that you can be trained to do these things. And as he says, this is his quote, there are things you can do to turn that around. So the key thing is to think about the audience and what's the main message you want to get across them. I guess I've just got across to you, my main message is that just don't turn up and expect a blur out to the audience because you'll probably miss it. His suggestion is then you rebuild that inside the listener's mind. You are the listeners, so we have to get across what's important. And I think in terms of your lectures, your class lectures, and I realise a lot of you just watch the videos of them, and I can understand that, is that a lecture should get across the lecturer's experience that you can't get out of a book. Because if you can get it out of a book, you might as well go and look at the book. There's not much point in turning up. So when you're doing that, so think about who you've got in the audience. Make it simple. If you want to get something across complicated, it needs to be written. We can't. The reason verbal things are much simpler because there's repetition, and we can understand. It's like listening to a story around the fireplace as cavemen and cavewomen. The big risk is too much information, and less is usually more. Okay, so the less you do, the better. So when you do your presentations on the 18th, less is more. The temptation is to put everything in. But I'm sure you've been to lectures where you've been drowned in facts. You know, Connor was telling me of somebody, 125 PowerPoint slides in an hour. So this is, I'm a bit geeky, and there's a term called a tricolon. Nobody will have heard of a tricolon. It sounds like an anatomical term, doesn't it? A tricolon is engage, educate, inspire. So it's things in triplicates. And good speakers often speak in those. So that's what you want to do, engage, educate, and inspire. So I run the Goodfellow unit, and that's what we try and do with our education, basically. So we pick our speakers, we make sure they've got good topics, and we try and get them to inspire. Touch, move, inspire, another sort of thing. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the sort of the foundation statement of the United States of America. That's called a tricolon, not to be confused with an epizeux, which is location, location, location. Did you know there were names for these things? Isn't that weird? Or week, week, week. It was Tony Blair talking about the former Prime Minister in the UK, so getting a bit nasty there. So my son went for a job with corrections, and I said, when they ask you why you want the job, is you say, I like working with people, I've trained in psychology, and I like the concept of keeping the community safe. boom, you've just relaxed the interviewers. Okay, you've gone boom, boom, boom. I go, woof, this person, you know, you'll look good. The other thing when you go for job interviews is have a message on your forehead, not figurative, not actually, just figuratively. I'm the right person for the job, because then your body language and your vocal language will be congruent. You can walk into a room and brighten it up if you want to. You can walk into a room and kill it, you know, just by your personality. Little tricks like this if you want to control the world. So slides, you want to break things up with photographs, talk about photographs. People like photographs, and it breaks up tedious text. So this was the winning slide for the summer students a couple of years ago. It was from Abby Andrews. She wasn't my summer student, but my summer student had gone. I said, do you want to be the best speaker? Do you want to win the prize? And like most summer students, reasonably ambitious, the answer was yes. So she was a pretty good speaker, but anyway, I said, okay, so you're only allowed 1 or 2 slides, so just do some pictures. So this was her conclusion. She was looking at why GPs might want to do a master's course or not. And some of them might want to do a master's to become leaders, so they would do a leadership thing, but not a master's of general practice. Some would want to be academics, so they'd probably go and do a PhD, not a master's in general practice. Some wanted to learn skills on how to do procedures. They wouldn't do a master's in general practice. The master's in general practice was for people wanting to reflect on their life, and really most GPs didn't want to do that. They would prefer that, or that. Winning slide. Not bad, eh? Better than, well, I'm going to show you in the second half some dreadful things. So this all comes out of a book called, and the TED Talk stuff all comes from this, called Made to Stick. It's a book by Chip and Dan Heath. And they looked at, it's a book about marketing actually, which in a sense is what you're doing. What you're going to be doing on the 18th is marketing your project. You're going to try and capture the interest of the people in the audience. You're going to tell them what it's about, but you want to inspire them. And they looked at all sorts of things that worked and didn't work. Why some companies, Chevrolet made a car called Nova. Does anyone speak Spanish here? And they tried to sell the Nova in Mexico. Nova in Spanish means no go. Of course, the car didn't sell at all. So that was an example of something that went completely flat. So they looked at what made good talks. So these are the messages. Tell the core, have something unexpected. I'm going to show you my little surprise. Anna's seen it already. You make it concrete and credible. You have some emotional thing there. You make me care. Stories to inspire me to act. So a TED Talk always starts off with, when I was blah, 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 this happened, and you get into the story. Because humans like being around the campfire listening to stories. We really relate to that. Makes us feel part of the tribe. Feeling part of the tribe is important. Because if you're not in the tribe, you die. Okay. Stories to inspire me to act, and then have a twist there and a little surprise. So here's my surprise. This is my guide dog puppy. Cute, eh? Would you like one of those? When I first saw that photograph, so we trained this little guy. His name was Gnarly. Still alive. But my first thought was, how did they keep the dogs still for the photograph? I mean, these are puppies. They're sort of doing this all the time. And it's a Labrador. So food, that's a Labrador, guys. That would not work with a puppy Labrador. Any idea how this is done? Only if you've heard my talk before. If you've not heard my talk before, anyone know how you got the dogs still? They spin them around. So that's a dog with vertigo. And that's why he's looking. Now, some people think that's a bit cruel, but I think it's sort of worth it for the photograph, and I don't think it caused lasting harm to him. Anyway, so that's Gnarly. Yeah, couldn't get the photograph if you didn't do that. Okay, so it's an artificial surprise, but you laughed. And laughter's a short holiday. Joan Rivers was an American comedian. She said, when you make people laugh, you give them a short holiday. So even if life's terrible, you have a bit of a laugh. And it has evolutionary bonding things. But don't just tell a joke. Check out the audience first. Telling jokes, you can be funny, but telling jokes formally may not be. Making fun of yourself, making fun of your puppy is different. So anyway, what happened to the puppy? He went to Christchurch. More on the puppy later. He's still alive. But anyway. So by doing that, I've now got your interest. When we come to the end, you're going to ask me to tell you what happened to the puppy. See? That's a little trick in terms of getting an audience to be interested. So there's all these little games people play with you. Comedians, people like that, they will be doing all this sort of thing. So when you start a talk, you have a good opening gambit. This was from Sandra Ahmad on TED Talk. She's a biochemist, but her opening gambit was great. For 30 years, I tried dieting. I never lost any weight. I started eating mindfully and I lost 10 pounds. Well, tell me more. Tell me more. How do you lose 10 pounds? So that's what's called an opening gambit. It's sort of, you know, and virtually all TED Talks start with something like this. There's Simon Sinek on YouTube, who talks about why are Apple anyone seen the video? Yeah. Why are Apple the best-selling computers? Why do people talk about them? Why? And you go, why? Tell me why. So then he goes through and explains why Apple did better than IBM PCs. So structure a talk, tell a story, your story, patient's story. Humans like stories. You won't obviously have the luxury of doing that on when you do your talk. If you want copies of this, if you've got a memory stick, you're welcome to take these. If you don't know an audience, one way is to get them in pairs to ask questions of each other and then ask you questions. Then check if you've answered the question. So I often give talks to a group of graduate nurses who know a lot about the topic I'm coming to talk about. So I don't know where to start with them because I don't know how much they know and how much they don't know. So the whole talk is just, what are your questions? Give them to me, and I'll go through those. I'll go through those talks, and I always get good feedback from that because everyone's had their question answered. So that's how that works. It's magical. Much easier. I don't have to prepare any. I mean, I take a whole lot of slides, but in 5 or 10 years, I'll never use them. Avoid direct questions. You know, the last thing you want is, well, you know, what does EMC squared mean? You know, you sort of you have a paralytic moment. You know, I mean, that does scares people. You don't do that to audiences. TED Talks, 20 minutes. They're actually, it's interesting that you have 1 hour lectures at university. We know after 20 minutes, they're rated only about 10%. I mean, you know, why do we keep doing them? So when we do talks, we try and break them up. Those of you who've seen us all, then do cases or something, or some physical act like voting. What do you think of the puppy photograph, guys? Thumbs up if you liked it. Anyone didn't like it? No. Good. So that's quite good. Getting an audience to vote can be quite a good little thing. So it just gets people moving and doing things too. I think taking questions as you go can change the direction of your talk. I had to welcome some Malaysian students here some years ago, and I was telling them about all the wonderful places they could go in Auckland. You can go to Goat Island, and you can feed the fish off the rocks, and there's ocean-going fish around you. You can go out to Piha, the surf's amazing. You go to Muriwai, there's all these birds out there. And there's sort of dead silence, and someone puts up their hand and says, what's the shopping like in Auckland? You know, boom. I'm not interested in shopping at all. I said, well, actually, probably the shopping's better in Kuala Lumpur. I'd completely missed the audience. So when I got the question, I realised, you know, they wanted to know about the shopping in Newmarket and downtown and different places, but I wasn't so. So sometimes getting a question will change how you go. If you want people to read something, you put it on their seat before they come in. So if you're giving a talk to a group of, in my case, doctors and nurses, we give handouts. And if there's going to be a handout, it goes on the seat. If you want somebody to, like feedback sheets, they go on the seat so people pick them up. Try and allow plenty of question time. I consider videos for variety. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried to give talks of videos, and I give a lot of public talks. The PowerPoint virtually always works. The video only works half the time. You either have the picture and no sound, or the sound and no picture, and you need to have an IT person available to make sure those go, unless you know how to do that stuff yourself. And so it's often just clicking one little button and then the sound comes on, but if you don't know where that little button is. So videos, I don't embed the videos, mainly because sometimes that wrecks them, they're the wrong format, and it makes the files very big. So a couple of things I did before I came here today. I got up this morning, had a look at my slides, and I emailed them to my Gmail account so that if I'd forgotten my memory stick, or sometimes I fly to another city and I leave them with the car park attendant at the airport with my car, I haven't got them, so that way they're emailed to me, and I print them out. because if all else failed, I could at least still give my talk to you. So there's a couple of little things you can do. Just print them out on 6 slides to a page, A4, and so I could give this talk if I didn't have my slides. Because I use the slides as an aid to my memory. Okay, so avoid the hard sell. Makes you less trusted. Being trusted makes an impact. And just think about the number, how much each slide can take. I remember when I was in 4th year medicine, John Scott, later Sir John Scott, said, if you have a handwritten piece of paper, double spaced, that will take you 20 minutes to talk about. And that was a really good bit of information to me because, you know, most people talk too much. And you want some space around the talk. So limit the number of slides. When people do webinars in the Goodfellow unit, we get these guys with their 100 slides. We say, you're only allowed 10. And we want three cases at the end. Otherwise, people talk. So they talk for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and then they do the cases, and then the questions come in. So you kill a webinar if you have 120 slides. And, you know, you've all been killed by PowerPoint. There's a couple of resources. There's Talk Like TED by Carmine Gallo. This is quite a good general one, how to give a great TED talk. There's a whole book on how to make good slides, and then there's Chris Anderson's talk there. This is all being recorded, by the way, so if you want to get a copy of this or a copy of the slides, you're welcome to them. So the take-home message is presentation literacy is a skill you're going to need in your careers. Learn how to engage an audience, good slides, variety. To educate people, focus on the important and the simple, and inspire with the story. Any questions?
How's the dog?
Sorry?
How old is he?
He's about 8 or 9 now. He's living in Bucklands Beach. Okay, so what happened? He went to Christchurch and he got spooked by the earthquakes. And so what dogs do when they get spooked is they pee. Well, you're a blind person, you've got a dog that's peeing in your house. Because he's trained to pee on command, actually. So if you say busy, he'll go away and pee. So that's part of your training. You're training him to pee on command, pee and poo on command. So he got spooked, so we came back and we had a bit of R&R for 6 weeks. And they reassessed him, and he was okay. But he was always a bit slightly anxious. And they just figured he might only last 2 years. And they actually like guide dogs to last 7 or 8 years because it takes a while for the owner to bond with them. Like I've got a patient who's blind. A gun went off and blew his eyes out when he was 20. So he's been blind since he was 20. And he says it takes about 3 or 4, 6 months to get used to a dog. So when they get a new dog, it's like they've got to build a relationship, you know, with the dog. And so they didn't think he'd last the 7 or 8 years that they like him to. So he's retired, and I get visiting rights to see him with the new owner. Just a couple of other things. So I just pointed out that you notice that there's black behind actually putting a dark border, putting a dark background is quite an important thing to make slides stand out. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the second how to make slides look good. And so any questions on that? So this second part is just the nuts and bolts, the do's and don'ts of slides. Now this will seem obvious, and most of you will have been tortured by bad slides at some point in your career. You have to remember who's watching this, and you've probably had slides when you can't read them if you're sitting in the back row. So slide, a big font, so that's 44 font, and then 32 font for the text. And you notice it's a blue-black background with white letters. That actually shines up, that shows up better when there's a lot of sunlight in a room. So if you're actually giving a talk, you think it'd be the other way around, having a light background and dark words, but actually having a dark background and light words. If there was ambient light in this room, that would be better. And you may have noticed I avoid capitals. So if you look at fancy magazines, the ones that cost $12 or $15, most of their lettering is in lowercase because the marketing people know your eye slides over lowercase letters more than... If you have N-E-X-T in capital letters, your brain sort of jars against them. Now, some people don't like that. Some of my colleagues don't like me doing that. And it means you have to go through and change everything, which is a bit tedious. So I allow capitals for some things. But just think about the looks of this. So when you make your slides for the 18, just step back and think, what message am I trying to get across to this audience? And what does this slide look like? Or get somebody else to look at it. That's the other thing. Somebody else to have a look at your slides. It's quite a good thing to do in research when you do a table or a graph is get somebody else to look at that and see if they understand it. And it's quite embarrassing. You think it's absolutely clear. It makes complete sense. And they'll look at it and say, I don't know what this is about. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. It really is quite eye-opening. So what I do with each slide, I make a duplicate for the next one. And that means that the headings aren't jumping around. So that heading is at the same place as that. So you make a duplicate, and that way all your slides are duplicates of the first one. The company logo is only on the first one unless you're trying to sell something. If you're trying to sell iPhones, then you probably want iPhone on every slide you sell. But you don't want to see the University of Auckland logo on every one of these things. It just takes up real estate and makes the slide look a little bit messy. So I just have the logo at the beginning and the end. Maximum 6 lines per slide, and I try and get all words in one line. So talks are relatively inefficient. If I was to get up here and read to you, some of you would start falling asleep within about 5 minutes. The read language is far too dense. The spoken language is relatively inefficient, but manageable to you. You can manage me talking like this. If I started reading, got the New Zealand Herald and started reading to you, you'd all be keeling over, and you'd lose it very quickly. I went to see that famous French philosopher Didier, I think that was his name, in the town hall, and he got up and read his notes. And honestly, I was asleep in about 10 minutes, but before I fell asleep, half the audience was sort of down. You know, it was just it was philosophical stuff. It was way too dense. Very, very inefficient way to do it. So don't try and give too much information. If you want to give information, let people read it. So I'm just going to let you read that. This is from a study we did. So that's better than me reading it. The problem if I start reading it, half of you will start to listen to me and half of you will reading. And I find when people read these sort of things, I miss half of it because I'm trying to read it and then I try and listen and then I try and read it. So it just gives a little pause in the room. You know, everyone just, the blood pressure comes down a little bit, the pulse comes down a little bit, everyone calms down. Well, that was from a study where we gave gout medication and blister packs. Very happy person. Really was very satisfying to do that. Don't do this. Causes of insomnia, treatments of insomnia. That is too busy, okay? So get it down. That's more than 6 lines. Way, way too busy. Don't do that.
Is there a difference when you're giving a talk, say to like educate a crowd, maybe your area, versus like a lecturer who would go to university to learn from? Because if I were to go to a uni lecturer, I would like the previous slide that you just showed, rather than like listening to everything they have to say and then just write it all down myself. I prefer it to all be on slides.
So you'd like a slide like that?
No, okay. Well, actually, no. Actually, if it's like a good little.
You see, I'd give that to you as a handout if I was speaking to you, because you want to have it in front of you. I mean, literally, I've seen that comes off somebody else. I hope it's not one of your slides or your parents' slide. Yeah, but I mean, this is showing off that you've got an article in the Lancet, but you know, you can show off in other ways. You know, Arroll, Lancet, Arroll, BMJ. You can do that, but that's pointless. What are you going to do with that? It's just messy. Yeah, so it depends what you're trying to do. I mean, if you're a politician and trying to get across a message, it would be different from a university lecturer. But I wouldn't try. I think even in our faculty, there's too much complicated stuff. You know, really, you need to read complicated stuff. The talking should be conceptual. It's an emotional connection. We're having an emotional experience here, folks, if you didn't realise it. I'm not trying to fill you full of facts. Yeah, just give you an idea of how to give some good talks. This makes a big difference on the 18th. Believe me, when we've started doing this talk, the quality of slides has just gone. So you'll do much better than you would have done without it, trust me. Okay, so you could do this, R.F. Lambert, blah, 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 blah. Paper on not finishing course of antibiotics. I would suggest to you there's much more information there than there. That's got more words, that's got more information. You can read that and take it in. Okay, so make a handout, speak to it. Simplify your talk. Most audiences can't cope with verbal complexity. Never put that up. Unless you had like half an hour and you're going to go, or somebody had that on their desk and you'd say, look at this bit over here. Might to do that, but I've literally seen that as a slide. Terrible. Seen that as a slide. And then the second worst thing is to say, look, I'm sorry about the busy slide. You just put a bullet in one foot, and you've just gone and put a bullet in the second foot, because you just told people that's a terrible slide, and they go, yeah, that's a terrible slide, isn't it, Well, I'm sitting here looking at these things thinking my life is going down the drain here while you're putting up slides like that. So you notice that I stand away from the lectern. I invest in my own, this costs $75. The university doesn't supply these because they get nacked, so I bring my own. And that way I can be out here and talk to you, which I would suggest is much more personal than me standing behind here. Much as you may feel safer back here, I would suggest you will do better in your public speaking if you're out here. And all the TED Talk speakers are out. There's only one I've ever seen with a stand. They have very few slides as well. I'm also looking at the screen, which is in the visual plane that you're looking at. So that's another little trick. This was taught to me by one of my academic colleagues whose wife was an actress. And so actors know where your visual pathway is going up there. And I'm looking at you and I'm looking at where you're looking, just to make sure what I'm talking about is what should be there. The one trap with these is you leave the little toggle. There's a toggle that goes into things. You have to make sure you don't. So I leave the bag out so that I don't leave it. I've left it. Actually, last year when I did this talk, I left it. Yeah, so don't do this. Be out here like that. Okay? Some conferences have monitors down here. And you may have seen that. And you can look like you're just looking at the monitor, not looking at the audience. The audience wants you to look at them, not at the monitor. So sometimes try and just look at the monitor and just remember what you have to say. And if you've only got 6 lines on there, that's actually quite easy. The slides for me, people say you should know your slides, but I never know the stuff that well enough to, I'm not doing this every day of the year. So they are a prompt for me, so I do use that. Think of the take-home message, 3 to 6 points maximum. And again, as I said before, what you want to do is transfer your experience to them. So I hope that I've transferred my experience. Practice your talk, maybe warm up your voice if you've got a bit of a cold. It's always good to get another person to watch you, so I'd suggest you rehearse before you do your thing next week. Good practice for the person watching also to give constructive feedback. Don't tell them it sucks, just say, well, there's some good things and there's some things you might want to change about this, okay? So you've got to learn to be gentle in your criticism. Humans can be very fragile. Check how much time it takes, because you only got, I think, 2 minutes and 1 slide, is it? 2 minutes, 1 slide? Okay. And then go through and remove words off the slides. That's quite an important thing to do. Chop the words out. As I say, print out a copy of the talk in case the IT fails. So, I mean, it shouldn't be too hard for you. Hopefully 1 slide you'll remember what it is. As I say there. And check the location. So we want you here early to load your slides up. Don't come at 9 o'clock and stick your slides in. Otherwise we get behind and everyone will be getting irritated. So turn up about 10 to 9, 5 to 9, 15 minutes to 9. Check the room out, check the sound, those sort of things. Those are the resources we've talked about. Last shot of Gnarly. He's now called Charlie. The new owners didn't like calling him Gnarly. It's a funny name, Gnarly. So all the dogs, so all his litter begin with N. So we met Nola and Nigel and Gnarly. Yeah, calling a dog Nigel's a bit rough, isn't it? But apologies to any Nigels in the room. The name Bruce has disappeared too, by the way. Yeah, so I have to remember to call him Charlie, not Gnarly, when I see him. Otherwise, the new owner gets a bit offended. But other than that, yeah, that's him in Western Park. So chase tennis balls, have a lovely time. Any questions, folks? Okay, so if you want a copy of those, they're here. If anyone's got a memory stick, if you want a copy, then you can email me. Or maybe, Kate, do you want to be the go-to person for these? How do we turn the lecture